Hi there. Today I'd like to talk about this book, British Rock Guitar, The First 50 Years, The Musicians and Their Stories by Mo Foster. It has a foreword by Hank Marvin. Now, many autobiographies of musicians talk about them standing at the window of a music store in whatever city they were brought up with the nose pressed against the window looking with envy at some instrument, more specifically a guitar, which is beyond their financial reach. And that was certainly the case with me. I spent a lot of time looking in the window of Hesse's and Rushworths, and also entering the store and looking around. Um, I first got interested in the guitar when where I used to play as a schoolboy. A place called Daysbrook Lane. A group of guys, we all kind of more or less attended the same school or were friends of people from our school. We used to play, and then one day, a guy who's a bit older than us. In fact, he was married. Um, was standing outside his house playing the guitar, and I got fascinated by this and got talking to him, and decided I wanted to learn to play the guitar. The guy's name was Jeff, and I ended up buying a cheap Zenith guitar from a chap at school, and started to learn on that. And eventually, actually joined the group that Jeff formed, and his guitar was a Hofner Senator, and he actually passed it on to me. I ended up with it, and very, very beautiful instrument, but very high action, very difficult to play. Um, which I only found out later by picking up some other guitars, which were a lot easier to play, easier action. Anyway, the book by Mo Foster, it kind of intertwines or parallels his experience uh, as a budding musician right through um, to eventual success. But he parallels it with interviews with other people who are prominent in the business. So start things like first instruments and so on. And he talks to different guitar players about what they first bought and so on. So another thing he talks about is transporting the instruments. The book really starts off in the era of skiffle, and the base of in a skiffle was a tea chest base. Uh, you could get tea chests from large grocery stores. They were plywood. Uh, put a pole, usually a broom pole, in it and a string, and it would be a rudimentary base. And a funny story from a guy from the Foremost, the Measure-Beat band, was back then the buses had an open rear platform, and that's where you got on. There was no doors, and it had a pole, so you could hold on to the pole to, for stability. And this guy's running for the bus, and he makes a grab for the pole, but it's the pole of the base, and he goes flying with it. So another part of the book is on guys who ended up being the nominated bass player. It's sort of toss of a coin: who's going to play bass, who's going to stay on the orthodox guitar. And obviously, the big example of that was Paul McCartney, where he ended up playing the bass in the Beatles just by default after Stu left. And he didn't want to do it. He preferred to play the guitar. And John said to him, well, it would help if you actually had a guitar. His guitar disintegrated, so he didn't really have much of an argument. So another chapter is about the Strat, the Fender Stratocaster. Now it's an iconic instrument, and it was much admired and envied by musicians who really only saw it on album sleeves, notably the album of Buddy Holly and the Crickets. So many guitar players reference that as the first view of a Strat, and the very first Stratocaster was actually imported by Cliff Richard to give to Hank in the Shadows. Um, and I believe Bruce Welch still has that. Anyway, one thing Colonel Cooper once said is holding a rifle is to a hunter what holding a baby is to a mother, that feeling. And the Stratocaster sort of has that aura about it. Gavin Lyle also said about the design of certain aircraft. Certain aircraft just look fantastic, and we prefer them um, against all others. His personal favourite was the um, Constellation, Lockheed Constellation 049. Thought it was a beautifully designed aircraft. And similarly with guitars, there are many really wonderful guitars. Um, as our noses were pressed up against windows, we'd see them. The big um, Archtop guitars with lots of pickups on them and beautifully um, um, inletted and so on. But amongst above them all is the Strat, in my opinion, because photographs don't really do it justice. It's when you pick one up, it's the contours of it. And designed in 1954, it still looks futuristic, and there's not many things from 1954 you could say that about. So he talks about um, British beat, uh, Move It being the kind of iconic record from that period. The first real British rock and roll record, I've got to agree 100%. It's still a fantastic piece of music. Um, then, as his band uh, developed, he formed a band called the Trade Winds. They moved on from skiffle and were playing rock and roll. And he was he had bought or been nominated to be a bass player, and he bought a Dallas Tuxedo bass, which he had played through a radiogram, and they used to actually take this around with them. And similarly, when I had that Zenith guitar, I was given a pickup that you could bolt onto it over the sound hole, and my dad rewired it. He took the jack plug off it, and he rewired it to go into the radiogram, which was a massive piece of furniture we all used to have. And there's lots of stories in the book about people who eventually bought saved up enough money to buy an electric guitar, but had neglected to budget for an amplifier, or maybe went away. You need an amplifier. One guy actually went home. He's quoted in the book, and took the jack plug off and uh, tried to rewire it to plug into the mains. Unfortunately, there was a loose connection, and it didn't get electrocuted. And there's a quote from a guy who worked in a music shop who said this was very common. He said a guy would come in and be trying to stick a jack plug into a wall socket in the shop to try a guitar out. It kind of Darwinian, that so many did survive. So anyway, in the trade winds, Mo Foster upgraded from the radiogram, and the group bought a Watkins Dominator, and all three guitars, including the bass, went through this Dominator where they played on stage. Now the Dominator was 17 watts output, and one of the guys um, in the band actually said, "Do we really need 17 watts?" Which is rather funny now. Um, Mo Foster said he was touring with Jeff Beck, and his amplification was 1,500 watts. So it just shows you the difference. So the book goes on to talk about session work. Mo Foster became a very prominent uh, bass player for sessions. Lots of stories, the other session players, in a similar vein to Vic Flick, whose book I reviewed earlier, that session world where everyone knew each other and the foibles and so on, and the arrangers and the fixers and all this. Lots and lots of anecdotes of that. So Mo Foster had a terrific career. He worked or toured with Brian May, Ringo, Van Morrison, Hank Marvin, to name just a few, and of course Jeff Beck, as we mentioned. There's hilarious stories, and the book really, it's a real treasure, and I recommend it.